The moment whispers of a federal grand jury began circulating behind closed legal doors, everything changed. Because when Netflix allegedly freezes a final payment in the middle of a high-profile production agreement, that is not just a contract dispute, that is a warning shot fired across Hollywood, Washington, and Montecito all at once, and suddenly the glossy headlines about streaming success and empowerment documentaries were replaced by a single chilling question: what exactly triggered the freeze, and who knew it was coming? By sunrise, the rumor mill was no longer murmuring, it was roaring, because insiders began claiming that Netflix executives, including co-CEO Ted Sarandos, had quietly instructed internal legal teams to pause the release of a substantial final payment tied to a high-visibility content agreement involving Archewell Productions, the media arm founded by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And while there is no official confirmation of criminal wrongdoing, no public indictment, and no documented federal filing that confirms the existence of a grand jury investigation, the timing of the alleged freeze is what has everyone talking, because it reportedly followed heightened scrutiny around charitable disclosures, production expenses, and classification of certain media projects that were positioned as both entertainment and impact-driven initiatives. And when those lines blur, the optics alone can spark alarm. The core of the storm revolves around Archewell, co-founded by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle after their departure from royal duties, a foundation and production entity that positioned itself as a force for compassionate storytelling and global advocacy. And over the past few years, the couple secured a high-profile production partnership with Netflix, reportedly valued in the tens of millions, widely discussed as part of a broader strategy to build a media empire independent of the British monarchy. Yet now, according to unverified but persistent claims, the final installment of a payment tied to a project deliverable may have been paused, not canceled, not terminated, but paused pending what some describe as compliance clarification, a phrase so sterile it almost disguises the panic behind it. The allegation that a federal grand jury could be reviewing aspects of financial reporting connected to production expenses is not confirmed by any court docket, and no federal agency has publicly named Archewell or any individual as a target of criminal investigation. But in Hollywood, perception can move faster than fact, and the mere suggestion that federal authorities might be examining documentation related to charitable deductions or content-linked expenditures is enough to send boardrooms into defensive mode. Because when a publicly traded company like Netflix faces even the shadow of regulatory entanglement, legal teams act first and explain later. Ted Sarandos, a seasoned executive known for steering Netflix through both expansion and controversy, has not issued a statement acknowledging any payment freeze, and Netflix has not announced a breach of contract. Yet insiders allege that internal risk assessments intensified after questions were raised about how certain projects were categorized within corporate filings, whether as commercial entertainment ventures or as charitable impact initiatives tied to Archewell's philanthropic messaging. And while dual-purpose projects are not illegal by default, the distinction matters when tax classifications and donor narratives intersect with streaming profits. Prince Harry, whose role within Archewell has often been described as both co-founder and public face, has not addressed the rumors publicly, and Meghan Markle's representatives have similarly remained silent on claims of payment freezes or federal review, and that silence is being interpreted in dramatically different ways depending on who was whispering, because to supporters it signals confidence and refusal to dignify speculation, but to critics it looks like strategic quiet while lawyers assess exposure. The phrase grand jury is powerful because it implies secrecy and potential escalation, yet it is crucial to state that as of this moment there is no public record confirming that a federal grand jury has convened specifically in relation to Netflix, Archewell, Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, or Ted Sarandos, and allegations circulating online appear to stem from unnamed sources and speculative commentary rather than verified court proceedings. But that has not stopped commentators from weaving a narrative in which compliance reviews, delayed payments, and past scrutiny over charitable. But filings are connected into a single dramatic arc. In the past, Archewell did experience administrative issues related to documentation filings with state authorities in California, matters that were reportedly resolved and brought back into good standing. And while those issues were procedural rather than criminal, critics argue that repeated compliance attention can amplify vulnerability when major corporate contracts are involved, because entertainment conglomerates are acutely sensitive to reputational risk, especially in an era where regulatory enforcement around tax reporting and nonprofit transparency has intensified. Behind the scenes, the most explosive part of the rumor is not the alleged freeze itself, but the implication that Netflix may have invoked internal clauses tied to financial integrity, sometimes informally described as morals or compliance provisions which allow companies to withhold payment, pending clarification of legal exposure. And while there is no evidence that such a clause has been formally activated, insiders claim that accounting reviews were requested after external chatter raised questions about cost allocation between production budgets and philanthropic branding. What makes this narrative combustible is the collision of three powerful brands: Netflix, a global streaming titan; Archewell, a foundation intertwined with celebrity advocacy; and the personal identities of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, figures whose every move generates polarized commentary. And when these worlds intersect with federal rumor, the story morphs from entertainment gossip into something that feels constitutional, financial, almost geopolitical, because the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are not ordinary producers, and Netflix is not an obscure studio. Sources familiar with corporate governance stress that payment freezes, if they occur, are often precautionary rather than punitive, designed to protect shareholders while questions are reviewed. And it is entirely possible that any pause, if it exists, relates to routine documentation verification, rather than criminal suspicion. Yet in an environment saturated with speculation about tax classifications, charitable deductions, and streaming profits, routine precautions can look like emergency brakes. As the hours pass, online forums dissect every previous statement, every public filing, every interview clip, searching for hidden meaning, while legal analysts remind viewers that grand jury proceedings, if they exist at all, are sealed and not confirmed through rumor and until an official body names individuals or entities in a formal action. All allegations remain unproven and unclear. Yet the narrative continues to gather force, because in the court of public perception, ambiguity often feels like evidence. The tension now sits in the space between silence and disclosure, between corporate caution and celebrity narrative control. And as Netflix maintains official quiet and Archewell offers no public rebuttal, the unanswered question lingers heavier with each passing hour. Was this merely a compliance pause wrapped in sensational rumor, or is there a deeper legal review unfolding behind closed federal doors? If this was the tremor, this is the aftershock, because by the time afternoon shadows stretched across Montecito and Manhattan boardrooms alike, the narrative had hardened into something far more combustible than a simple contractual pause, and the names circulating in private legal chats were no longer abstract references to executives or producers, but very real individuals. Ted Sarandos at the helm of Netflix, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle at the center of Archewell, and unnamed compliance officers whose job it is to quietly assess exposure when reputations begin to wobble. And while no federal agency has publicly confirmed a grand jury, no indictment has been filed, and no formal charges have been announced, the allegation that documentation tied to production expenditures could be under federal review has been enough to trigger a defensive crouch inside a corporation. That answers to shareholders before it answers to sentiment. Behind the curtain of polished press statements and carefully worded non-denials, what insiders describe is not chaos but calculation, because Netflix, as a publicly traded entity, cannot afford to appear indifferent to any rumor involving federal oversight, especially when it involves tax, classifications, charitable associations, or cost allocations that might invite scrutiny from regulators. And so even in the absence of confirmed wrongdoing, even in the absence of verified grand jury proceedings, a prudent executive like Ted Sarandos would be expected to request internal audits, documentation reviews, and perhaps a temporary withholding of final disbursements until clarity is achieved, not as an accusation, but as insulation. The most persistent whisper suggests that the alleged freeze involves a final payment connected to a deliverable under the broader content partnership between Netflix and Archewell Productions, a deal widely reported to have been substantial in scope and ambition, and though the original contract terms remain confidential, industry observers understand that milestone-based payments are standard practice, meaning that final installments are often contingent upon compliance certifications, financial transparency, and contractual representations being reaffirmed at each stage. And when questions arise, even speculative ones, legal departments do not wait for headlines to clarify intent. They pause, they verify, and they protect. What makes this episode so volatile is the intersection of philanthropy and profit, because Archewell has consistently framed its storytelling ventures as extensions of its broader mission, blending media projects with social advocacy themes. And while such blending is neither illegal nor uncommon, critics argue that dual branding invites scrutiny if expenses appear to straddle categories in ways that regulators might question, and it is precisely this gray zone, not proven misconduct, not documented fraud, but categorization ambiguity, that rumor has inflated into something far more sinister, attaching the charged phrase federal grand jury to a scenario that at present remains unverified. Prince Harry's position within this narrative is particularly precarious because, as co-founder of Archewell and a signatory to public messaging, he embodies both the mission and the visibility of the enterprise, yet he has not issued any direct comment on the alleged payment pause or the rumors of. Federal Review and Meghan Markle, whose media presence often amplifies Archewell's initiatives, has similarly refrained from addressing the allegations publicly, leaving a vacuum that commentators rush to fill with theories about internal strategy sessions, legal briefings, and high stakes conference calls that may or may not be occurring behind closed doors, but the broader context cannot be ignored either, because Archewell previously navigated administrative scrutiny related to state-level documentation filings, matters that were reported as resolved and restored to good standing, yet the memory of those episodes lingers in online discourse, providing fertile ground for new speculation whenever federal terminology enters the conversation, and so what might otherwise be an internal audit or routine verification is reimagined as a sweeping investigation, even though no agency has confirmed that characterization. That Ted Sarandos, seasoned in managing public storms, understands that silence can sometimes protect more effectively than denial. And so, the absence of a detailed rebuttal from Netflix does not necessarily imply confirmation of wrongdoing. It may simply reflect legal strategy, because corporations rarely litigate rumors in real time, preferring instead to complete internal reviews before issuing statements that could later be contradicted by evolving information. As speculation swells, the most important distinction remains this: allegations are not evidence, rumors are not rulings, and until a federal authority publicly confirms investigative action, the narrative remains built on anonymous sourcing and interpretive leaps rather than court-verified documentation. Yet in the court of public opinion, nuance often dissolves under the weight of dramatic framing, and phrases like grand jury carry emotional force that eclipses disclaimers. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, whose transition from royal duties to independent media ventures was always destined to attract scrutiny, this moment represents a crucible of credibility, because the brand they constructed around transparency and impact storytelling now faces amplified examination, fair or unfair, and while there is no proof of criminal conduct, no filed indictment, and no official statement from the Department of Justice naming them, the rumor alone exerts pressure on partners, donors, and audiences who equate silence with suspense. In the end, what remains undeniable is that a simple allegation that Netflix may have frozen a final payment as federal grand jury rumors surfaced has transformed into a sprawling saga touching on corporate governance, charitable transparency, celebrity accountability, and the volatile alchemy of modern media ecosystems. And whether this episode ultimately resolves as a routine compliance review, a clarified contractual milestone, or something more serious yet unannounced will depend not on speculation but on documented action. Because until authorities speak in filings rather than whispers, the line between scandal and story remains suspended in ambiguity. And so the world waits, not for hashtags or headlines, but for facts, for a statement from Netflix, for confirmation or denial from federal authorities, for clarity from Archewell. Because in a landscape where perception moves faster than proof, the truth is often the last arrival. And until it steps forward, everything else remains rumor wrapped in intrigue.